Alright guys, so this video is discussing the question, writing ratios for real world situations. So the question is, there are 7 green apples and 5 green apples in a basket. And it says, what is the ratio of red apples to all the apples in the basket? And then what is the ratio of green apples to all the apples in the basket? So just to go over what this is asking you, it's asking you to write a ratio. And a lot of times you guys are like, what is a ratio? I don't know what a ratio is. So a ratio can be written a number of different ways. It can be written in word form, where it's literally saying something to something else, like it does have here, like green apples to all the apples in the basket. And then it can be written as numbers, which is one of the ways that we're going to do it today. And then sometimes it can also be written as fractions. But we're not going to get into that today. You don't need to know that for this quiz question. So when you write it as the way that we're going to be writing it, it's going to give you this in your little toolbox for your answers. You're going to need to use this. So it's going to tell you something, there's a blank, you put your number in, and this thing for your ratio to something else. This is called a colon. You can see this on your keyboard. It's next to the L button when you're typing. That's irrelevant. You already have the tool to click it and put it in there. So when you look at this thing right here is telling you 2. So when you write something, you're saying something, you just call that 2. So when you read a question like this, it says something to something else. So so for the first question, it says, what is the ratio of red apples to all the apples in the basket? Okay, so I'm going to erase this. It's starting to look a little messy. So how many red apples do you have? Well, I have 5 red apples. So for this question right here, I would say 5, because that's how many red apples you have. And then it tells you 2, so I put make sure that the dot is there. And then all the apples in the basket. But really quick, if you go in, you say, well, I have green apples and red apples in the basket. Altogether, that's 7 plus 5, which tells you that there are 12 apples total in the basket. Okay, so how many apples are there in the basket altogether? 12. Okay, this is literally all you have to do. That is your answer for that question. Now, for the second one, for B, it says, what is the ratio of green apples to all the apples in the basket? So you can set it up, make sure you put your ratio thing there, and it says green apples. Okay, well, how many green apples are there? There are 7. And then to all the apples in the basket. Well, all the apples in the basket, again, is 12. Okay, now, these questions aren't always going to be specifically like this. So, it'll ask you something like, what are the ratio of all the apples, which is 12, to the green apples in the basket. Okay, so you would have to put all the apples to the green apples as your answer. So make sure you're reading it in order. And then I also have had people say, well, what order do I put it in? Okay, which is also a really good question, because a lot of times people don't know, like, what does it matter what order it's in? It really does. Because if you don't, then it's completely off and your answer will be considered wrong. So when you are reading the question, okay, so let me just erase this real here. So at first it tells you, what is the ratio of, and it tells you red apples, and it tells you all the apples, right? You need to make sure that your answer is that answer to this answer. It needs to be in the same order. So, for example, let me actually do the color of the apple that it says. So, green apples to all the apples in the basket is in the same order here as green apples to all the apples in the basket. If you put the answer, so let's just say if the answer over here is, if you say, okay, well, I know there's 12 and then there's 7, this is not in the same order as this, and this these two things are not the same. Like, it's not in the same order that it's asking you in, and it'll mark that question wrong. Okay, so make sure that you're putting it in the same order as it tells you in the actual question. Okay, because if you put it in the wrong order, it will mark it wrong. So make sure you're taking the time to say, okay, well, what's first? What's next? Okay, because it truly does make a difference, and you will do all that work for nothing. Okay, so make sure you're putting in the right order, and make sure you are using this doodad right here that's in your that is in your toolbox for your answer, and you should be good. So if you need any more help, let me know.